Welcome to the Innovative Leader Podcast, featuring Christy Geiger, Executive Coach with Synergy Strategies, and David Phillips, Professor, Consultant, and Coach.
Hey, this is Christy Geiger with Synergy Strategies, here with David Phillips and your Innovative Leader Podcast. Today, we wanted to put together something on organizational change theory, and David in his doctorate program had put together a outline for organizational change theory that really helps to think through what are the questions that you need to ask, what is the process that you need to go through in order to create this change. And right now with COVID-19, and it can be applied to any challenging time, really, how do we begin to innovate and adapt our organizations? And so today we're going to go through that. David, you want to kick that off?
Yeah, so kind of the basis for this was in my doctoral work, I did some thoughts on individual change, and then being the nerd that I am, I went into a master's program in communication, and so this was kind of born out of it on in organizational change. So the first piece of this really is to gather your team, gather your group, especially for a small business. You want to gather the people who are influential, your stakeholders, your employees, people who have a history with your organization.
Perfect. And if you don't, sorry to interrupt. So if you are maybe a solopreneur, independent person, you might gather a mastermind group or a group of colleagues, people in your same industry, people just who are willing to collaborate with you. So bottom line, you're bringing a group together. And just to back up real quick, there's 7 steps to this change process, right?
Yeah. We're gonna spend most of our time in 2 of them. So developing a current reality and then developing a strategy. But yeah, there's seven pieces to this. So you gather your team, your class, your master group, your influentials, and then the second piece is you begin to define reality. And this is important because you can't understand where you're going until you understand how you got where you are. The past provides a trajectory if it's left unchanged. And so this reality, this is in essence saying this is who we are and this is how we got here. And here I'll just throw out some questions to ask. And Christy, interrupt me if you want to make some comments.
Okay.
But the first is like, where did you come from? How did give the history of the organization? What's been your story from the beginning? If it's an older organization, what's it been like the last 25 years? What's the last 10 years been like? What's the last 5, the last 2, the last year? Break it down into a timeline.
Now, is this trying to get into your, maybe part of your purpose or your mission? Like, why do we exist? Why were we created? What are we trying to accomplish? Like, is it that part of the story?
Yeah, so it's why did we even do this in the first place? What was the motivation behind it? What was the core purpose whenever we started? And then if you begin to look at the last 25 years, in some cases, it may be longer, but I just go back to 25 years. If you begin to look there, then you maybe can begin to see, how did that purpose change? What happened? There were historical moments that maybe created a transition in your organization. What was it? How did that feel? So you begin to, it's just looking at, trying to uncover events or feelings or emotions or pain points or cultural events that are part of your story, because that story defines you. It defines who you are as a person. It also defines who your business is. And COVID right now is really stretching organizations to define who they are and how they're going to function. And in 10 years, when they look back at the story of COVID, it's going to be impactful one way or the other, positively or negatively. So it really is, why did we start this in the first place? What launched it? And then how has our world, our culture, the events in our world, personal events that happened that impacted the way I ran the business. How did all of those come about? How does that look on your corporate timeline, on your organizational timeline? Does that make sense?
Yeah, let's go back and break that down just a little bit. So when we're looking at where did I come from, how do we get here, there's kind of this bigger picture. And you were talking about our motivation, our core purpose. And is the purpose of doing that to kind of strip down the essence of your business so that as you begin to change and evolve, you don't lose the core of who you are and the core of what you're about? So you're kind of culling out the past to go, oh, we've been here and here, and we've been all over to these different places, but really the essence of what we're about is this. Like, is that what you're doing, is filtering and extracting this bottom line of what you're about? Or how would you say that?
Yeah, I think that's good. Let me give an example. So years ago, I'm 50 years ago, I used to listen to vinyl. That's all we had. Then came the 8-track, and then came the cassette, and then came the DVD, and then the CD, and then ultimately we're streaming music now, right? So years ago, you had record companies, and they, in some cases, are even still called record companies, who made vinyl. And a lot of those vinyl companies went out of business when the CD came around. And what happened was they didn't realize they were in the music media platform. They weren't in the record making business. They were in the music distribution business. And so all those companies who thought they were simply just a record company went out of business because their identity was everything had transformed. They just thought of themselves as a record company, but they didn't define really who they were in terms of what they did. They were a music distribution, music media distribution company, not a record company. And so ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to strip all this stuff out to say, get to the core of who you are and get to the core of why you got in this in the first place, and try to navigate, try to strip out all the superfluous stuff from the past, ever how long you've been in business, so that you can get back to an identity.
Mm-hmm. Or even your last evolution or whatever.
Or your last evolution. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's about getting bigger than your product, bigger than the transaction of what you do or how you've been doing business. And it's kind of boiling down to this snapshot or this core. I don't want to keep using the word essence, but it's the value or solution that you ultimately provide. It kind of reminds me of the Simon Sinek, the why. Like, what really is your why? What is this compelling core thing? And that as you build on that why, the what can change over time.
Right.
But when we come back to the center, it's really this why. What is the solution? I'm trying to bring peace. I'm trying to bring comfort. I'm trying to offer simplicity, whatever it is. That the core is not necessarily your transactional product, but what you are creating with your company and the things that you do.
No, that's perfect. That's the perfect way to sum that up. And
okay,
so
cool.
Yeah, so that's what has been your story. And then if it were me, because I'm a visual learner and I see it, I would create a visual timeline. This happened at this point, this happened at this point, and just start marking those on the timeline. And then you might begin to see patterns, either economic patterns, you might begin to see personal life patterns, you might begin to see cultural patterns that has impacted your organization over the past, X years.
So you could almost do a visual timeline.
Yeah.
And to me, I would see myself putting the what did I do? Because I think it's so easy to think in the what, which accidentally steals the why often.
Mm-hmm.
So just get it out of your head. Be like, okay, we did this, this, and this. But then to go back and be like, why did we do that?
Right.
Why did we do that? What was this about? What were we
Right.
trying to accomplish? What were we really doing? And how do all these things connect?
Right.
Okay, great. So you kind of have this foundational look of who you are, your identity. Then what's next?
Yeah. Then take a look at what you're doing now and how are you defining your organization now?
Mm-hmm.
So what, we say a lot of things that we don't really do. So, we say we have this mission to do X, Y, and Z, and we're really doing A, B, and C. So define yourself now. What are you doing in practice? How are you marketing yourself? And then how do you think you are defining yourself? And where does that divide? Mm-hmm. Where is that division between what you think you're doing and what you're actually doing?
Right. Because so you're looking a bit at, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So then you're looking back and then you kind of come into present time.
Right. You're looking at the now.
Whatever's creating the challenge, but the present reality of, okay, we said we were doing X, Y, Z. We really were doing A, B, C. So this is really who we've been, which then tips into
who we are.
Whatever has created this challenge.
Yep. And so where have we been? And in essence, who are we? And mm-hmm. the additional question, a couple of questions that kind of work in that is, how have others defined us? The problem for many organizations is they don't know how they're seen outside of their own viewpoint, outside of their own perspective. Mm-hmm. And so look at how look and listen to see how other people are defining you.
Perfect. That can be part of kind of this current, who are we, our own thoughts, what others say. Maybe that's done by a little bit of a survey or some market research or a really simple, easy Facebook post. And
Facebook reviews.
People respond.
Yeah, reviews, those kinds of mm-hmm. things. And so you're looking at how the market sees you. Then what changes have happened in the market from the beginning? So let's go back to who we are and who we were, then who we are, and then look at what's happened in the market, and that potentially that helps us reframe and rethink some of the why. It's not the why, the what. So we've kind of defined our why, or your why, and now some of these changes in the market those have affected our what. Changes in the market, changes culturally, 9/11, COVID, the .com bust, the .com bubble, the housing bubble, those kinds of things. And so that helps us understand what we may have done differently and explain some of that. So those are some things that kind of go back to that whole visual timeline in helping us understand the changes that may have moved us away from that core.
So I just want to clarify. So is that, because it sounds like two things to me. So I get the current time, and then the challenge. Part of it sounds like the challenge is still looking back, like, oh, these are things that influenced us and changed us. versus like there's kind of back, and that's like quadrant A, and then B, we go, okay, current time, who are we, who do other people think we are, whatever.
Right.
And then, and maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but to me it seems like then there's C, which is the challenge. What has happened? So for right now, we're really talking about COVID-19. It's a significant impact
Right.
that has happened, and that creates ripples in our culture, the market, what people need, what people want, what people do. Like, how has it impacted us is kind of present. But are you saying not that way, or how are you saying
No,
that?
I'm saying it. So you can use it that way. Obviously, that's a good way to look at that. But it also impacts your corporate history, organizational history, because it shows the what. So this world event happened. What did I do in response to that? And did it take me away from the why, to use the next terms?
Mm-hmm.
Which again kind of help you figure out where you are now. But it's also what is happening in the market today, what changes are going on culturally, economically, technologically, politically, and that begins to help you develop your strategy. But when you look back at it, it also helps you understand how you got to where you are.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a both and then another aspect of that is now if you're a solopreneur, something like that, this may not be as impactful in some cases, but how has leadership affected the organization? If there's been a change in the leader's story, a health crisis, a death, then that potentially could change the direction of the organization. So that's another aspect that kind of helps you get to where you are today, the current situation. And then as you look forward, it becomes part of the strategy of how do we tweak and how do we make changes and those kinds of things. So, are you looking at retirement? Are you looking at, do you have a spouse that's sick that may pass away? I mean, that's just a reality. A bankruptcy. I mean, there's all kinds of personal things that impact the leader's story, which will then impact the organization's story.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make
And you're
sense?
just broadening that out to
Yep.
not just be applying to COVID, but the challenge or a precipitating change could be many things. It could be an illness, it could be whatever in the future, some other situation that precipitates this evaluation
Right.
or the change that's going on.
Yep. So all we're doing is we're evaluating where we came from and where we are right now. And once we pull all of that together, then we can paint a picture of who we really are. What's our current identity?
Mm-hmm.
What do we really do? What do we say we do? Now, how do we get those to match? Because individually, we all act out of our identity. Our identity drives behavior. And your identity as an organization will drive what you do and how you do, and ultimately how you do it. The practice of what you do will be driven by who you are. It shows up in reality.
And does that point kind of tip into step 3, where step 3 is developing a new adapted strategy?
Right.
You're kind of getting the information for what this new strategy is going to be based on not only your current identity, but are the needs kind of from that challenge is where you're identifying what is the change and what is our identity. So how do we help to provide for that, or what solution do we offer for that? That's kind of buttoned up in our identity, which then begins to inform that step 3, or is that premature?
Yeah, no, that's a perfect way to say it though. So the way I think of it is the question I want to ask myself is this the identity that I really want for my organization?
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, you develop your strategy.
So let's go into that just for a second, because I think that can be sometimes confusing, this piece between, it's like that Wayne Gretzky quote about skating to where the puck is going to be instead of
Right.
where the puck is. And I think sometimes it's confusing, or it can be challenging to not accidentally to be skating to the puck. And sometimes our challenge or the situation becomes the puck that we skate to. So then we're like, oh man, this is happening. This is happening. What can we do to help?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of the sky is falling, and everyone runs around, whatever.
Right.
So to me, it seems like sometimes, how do you make sure that you're not reacting to the challenge and addressing something short term, and that you're really getting out ahead of it and looking at the challenge and the impact, so that you're actually assessing the challenge and applying it to your identity and what you have to offer, forward looking and not reactive? How are you proactive, future focus versus reactive, current focus?
Yeah. So featuring is that's a fun topic. It's almost something that we could it would behoove us to spend a whole podcast on. The way I look at it is, and I got this from my doctoral mentor. He used to record shows on his DVR, and he wouldn't watch the show. He would watch the commercials, because he said the commercial is really where the marketing is trying to take us.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is, especially for most small business owners, is we have so much to do that we don't take the time to think about those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's got to be space made in your work life to begin to look and try to look down the road. I think of it like in football, where you're the quarterback and you're trying to throw the ball. You're trying to throw your receiver open, throw it to where the receiver is going to be, not where he is. And to do that, you have to read the defense. You have to understand what the defense is doing. And if you can do that, then you can throw it to the right receiver at the right time. And when you throw it, you're obviously going to throw it before the receiver gets to where you're throwing it. So a lot of the hard work is essentially predicting the future, but it is looking at the signs of culture. What's popping up in your community, right? So if you're driving down the road and you have your favorite Mexican restaurant,
Uh-huh.
and then 6 months later, you have another Mexican restaurant pop up, and then a year later, you have another one pop up. One of two things is happening. People really like Mexican, and or not one of two, but a couple of things are happening. Either there's so much growth in your community that there's a need for multiple Mexican restaurants. But that could also mean there is an influx of Hispanics in your community. And so if your product or service can relate to a people group, then that's an opportunity for you. If, on the other hand, you see a lot of title pawn shops opening, that presents another aspect of culture, another thing that's going on. So it's looking around and noticing what's going on culturally in your own community, and then in a bigger framework, how are people trying to woo you through marketing? Where are they trying to take you? But it takes time. It takes carving out time to look and then begin to put the pieces together. So it is viewing the individual items. This goes to kind of what I call the micro macro mindset. So it's seeing the individual things that are happening, and then being able to place them in a way that you can see what's happening in the bigger picture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's good. To me, it reminds me of what we talk about in coaching about getting up in the helicopter. And a lot of times when we're running through the forest of our business or our lives or our situation, that it is difficult to really get that perspective. And so as a leader, you have to have space for yourself to literally get up in the helicopter to get above the forest so that you can see where the forest ends. You can see what's in the forest. You can see, if there is opposition coming, there's a river coming, what's going on, that you can see that bigger picture. So I think it speaks to the bigger picture. The other thing it kind of reminds me of is a bit of a pitfall that sometimes can happen when we're looking big picture. And sometimes when we're looking big picture, you begin to notice what everybody else is doing. And I think there's a balance of noticing without kind of getting the shiny diamond where you're like, oh, look at everyone's doing that, I should do that too. Or to suddenly get imposter syndrome where you're like, wow, everybody's written a book, what could I possibly write on? Or whatever, where some imposter syndrome shows up because it seems like that whole need is covered and there's nothing left to be done. So sometimes when you look big picture, you can start to do that. And it reminds me about this balance of you're looking out in order to understand the needs, and you're looking out to understand the wants of culture, so to speak. But then you have to come back inside to look at your passions, your identity, like you were saying at the beginning of why you're doing that step first, is because it comes back to the heart of who you are, so that you're not making this decision just, oh, it looks like we should start making tamales and delivering them to the door.
Right.
You're not just trying to get ahead of the competition by doing what the competition is doing. You're looking out to understand the need, but then you're coming back and you're saying, okay, what is our passion? What is our purpose? Why do we do what we do? And how do we serve this gap? What is the gap? What is the need? And how can our skill set and our gifts help to close that gap and add value to others?
Right. No, that's exactly right. And I really do like the way you put cool. that. Yeah.
Good. So then that all kind of shapes this current identity. And then you kind of have this picture, and I'm guessing you're starting to get some ideas of things that you can do. Does that tip you into stage 3?
Yep, it does.
Do you start that brainstorming in stage 2 or 3?
Yep. You start it in stage 3, step 3.
All right. What's stage 3 about?
Yeah. So this is where you're looking at developing that strategy. So you're taking your who. This is who I am. This is how I've defined myself and how I want to define myself in the future. This is my passion, my heart. This is what I want to do. This is what I'm good at. So all of that is kind of formulated. You have a picture of who you are and your identity and your organization's identity. And then you say, here's what I have been doing. How do I shape that to my identity? How do I shape that to the organization's identity? And so some questions that you ask: what is my product or service? What are its strengths, its weaknesses, its limitations? Things like, then you get into business things like cost structure and profit margin. But one of the things that I think you need to ask is, what type of economy and culture is required for this to be effective? Because you may try to do something and be in the wrong spot for it.
good. What other questions like that? That's a great question. What is required for this to be effective? What is the cost structure? And not that you need to get into scarcity thinking like, oh, nobody can afford this. Don't
Right.
be, watch out to not be fortune telling or leaning into and making decisions for other people. But also be reasonable.
Right.
What kind of advice, but maybe modifying an offering of a group thing or whatever, some way that you're modifying your offering to accommodate the current reality.
Right. Exactly. Because, you don't want to try to sell something that costs $10,000 in a community with a lot of title pawn shops.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, unless you're selling a car, but other than, so you got to think about those things. Then you move to competition. Who or what is my competition? Just, and then this is where you begin to analyze, does somebody have the same product or service? What opportunity is being met by the competition? Are we similar? How are we similar? How are we different? What opportunity do we meet that they don't? What opportunity do they meet that we don't? How does it impact us? How does it impact the future? And so you kind of go from your product and service to who is your competitor and how are they, essentially doing what you do, and how are you doing it better than them, or how are you doing it different from them, and what needs are you meeting that they're not?
Yeah, that's great. It reminds me somewhat too of where some partners can be developed too, that sometimes this is an opportunity to look for complementary businesses,
Right.
complementary partners. A simple story, one of my favorite stories, is how the ice cream cone was developed at the St. Louis World Fair. And the St. Louis World Fair, when that was happening, was really hot.
Mm-hmm.
And the waffle cart was not selling any waffles because it was so hot. So everybody wanted ice cream. And so the ice cream stand was very loaded and full of lines and whatnot. And the guy ran out of bowls, but he still had ice cream left. And he looked around and he has this waffle cart next to him. And so the waffle guy rolls up his waffle and he goes, put your ice cream on top of my waffle. And so that was the birth of the ice cream cone, was out of the St. Louis World's Fair.
Right.
Because that waffle man adapted to what was going on. He wasn't selling. He didn't get a scarcity mindset. He didn't pack up his goods and shut down and go home. He looked, what do they need? What is the need? And he adapted.
Right. Absolutely. And to me, some of those questions that I ask, and the partnership idea is a great idea, because you could bring, you could have another. You could meet someone or have a friend who does something that could potentially partner with you, but it could also be a springboard for innovation as well. But that really, for those things, are really, to me, under more of a micro thought process. You're looking at the details. Mm-hmm. Then you begin to move into a macro process. This is kind of the macro how I think of macro. And the question is, what are we doing now? The question is, how do we translate what we're doing now into an organization that can grow and adapt? And that's the futuring aspect. How can we translate what we're doing now into an organization that can grow and adapt? What bigger product or service can we offer?
What would be an example of that? A little bit, it reminds me, and I don't know if this is relevant to that piece, but another story that I love is Toyota. And Toyota's really started out as a sewing machine company. Mm-hmm. And the Toyota logo is the eye of a needle with the thread. And that at some point they evolved over into cars, and they saw themselves as a machinery company, not a sewing machine company.
Right. And that's kind of the mindset.
And say more.
Yeah. So Just trying to think of another example. But so if you, I guess it goes back to that record idea that I was talking about earlier, that you're not a record company. You have to see yourself bigger than that, because what you don't want to do is create an organization that can't adapt and grow. So I have this service, I have this product. How can I make it adaptable? And again, I'm just going to go back to that record idea that record companies were media distribution companies. They weren't record companies. They may have made vinyl, but they weren't record companies. And if they had seen themselves as record companies, then they could have been adaptable to when cassettes, 8-tracks and cassettes and CDs came along, and they could have stayed in business. Now, of course, vinyl's back, but it's just trying to think outside of your box. I am not just a baker. I can do much bigger than that. I can do things that would allow me to function if we couldn't make cakes anymore. Uber, maybe this is an example. Uber started out as a taxi service, but what they've turned into is a delivery service. They're delivering humans and they're delivering food, right? Mm-hmm. You don't see Lyft making that transition. No, good or bad, right or wrong, but if they can deliver food, then guess what? They can also deliver packages. They can. So if you're gonna, you can't niche yourself into adaptability and growth in many cases.
To me, it leans to that question that is kind of a pet peeve of mine, is about relevance and how do we keep ourselves relevant?
Right.
That you're not just adapting, you're not just changing. And I think that's a pet peeve for other people, for your stabilizers and your implementers are like, stop changing things. Why do we have to change this? That is not a necessary change.
Yep.
So I think stabilizers get frustrated when it seems like adaptation is happening for no necessary reason, versus when you're adapting in order to maintain relevance. It seems like that's often an area that companies get too attached to their old agenda, too attached to their old product, and then they begin to lose relevance.
Right.
And the more they lose relevance, they get closer to extinction. Versus if you're just asking that question, how do we keep ourselves relevant? Do we need to adapt in order to maintain our relevance?
Right. Yep. No,
Are there any other questions in the macro?
Yeah, on the micro, no. On the macro, so some of the things that I thought about was, what is the bigger opportunity that I'm providing? So every service is a way to meet an opportunity. Every product is a way to meet an opportunity. What's going on in culture? So again, we go back to being able to read the signs of culture and in the community. What's the opportunity? How do we adapt and maintain that relevance to meet the changes in culture? Are economics changing? Our profit margins changing, those kinds of things. And so to me, that's a macro framework. And then another big framework, another big macro question that I think is important to ask is, what happens when I start this? If I haven't started it already, what happens if I start it? And I'm a huge fan of Shark Tank. I think they've done a great service for the entrepreneurial spirit in our culture. And one of the questions that they always ask, or they ask many times, is, can this be replicated?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a question that we all have to struggle with. Can this product or service be replicated? Now, if you've got a cleaning business, people are opening cleaning businesses all the time. So yes, that service can be replicated. So what happens if it's replicated? What can I do? So some of the things that I see just in my own community, I get flyers dropped off at the mailbox all the time from lawn care companies, right? So it used to be that they would just come and cut your grass. But now I saw one the other day. They will do, they'll do gutter cleaning, tree trimming, mosquito spraying, aeration, weeding, anything that happens in your yard, it seems like they'll do.
Because what are they really doing? So in order to connect all of those things together and not be like, and we'll pick up your kids and make you hot dogs for dinner, in order to not just become the, oh my gosh, we're hurting for business and we'll do anything. What is the continuity? What is that underskirting that allows those to all connect together?
So I would see them potentially as an outdoor environment specialist, right? So that's how I would not frame myself as a lawn care company, even though that's what their name is. I would frame myself as an outdoor environment specialist. So you got bugs, we take care of that, because you want to live outdoors. This is for people who love to be outdoors, around their house, outside of their house. They want a good looking yard. They'd like to entertain. So we'll take care of your yard. We'll keep bugs from being around it. We'll, make sure your trees are trimmed, your grass is growing well. We'll, fertilize and do all that kind of stuff. So it's how you frame that and how you think about yourself. And it's not just here I'm throwing things in to try to keep business coming in. I'm not just a mower anymore. My service is offering outdoor environmental control. Right?
Yep.
And when you do that, then you begin to be able to offer services that fit within that framework, and you can differentiate yourself from others who are just mowing the grass.
Perfect. So the filter is it goes back to that why, what are we really providing, who are we really, not being defined by our service or our offering, but by the experience that we're creating, or the larger picture, the feeling, the essence of what we are really up to, and that anything that you offer is tied in and connected to that.
Yep. And don't offer things that don't tie in and connect to that, right? So don't, you potentially could, when you think about those experiences, you could move into handyman, building decks and things like that, painting, outdoor painting. And so you've got to evaluate, am I trying to do too much?
Right. What is our core service? Where does that become value add versus
diminishing returns? Yeah. So
what did you say?
Diminishing returns.
Diminishing returns, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you're doing things.
So just noticing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just noticing the time. So I was going to shift to kind of our last 4 points, but say that last piece that you were saying.
No, that's where I was going to go to.
Okay, perfect. So we kind of step 3, we're developing this new adaptive strategy, both a micro and a macro view, the big picture, and zooming in and being specific. And then what about how in the last 5 minutes can we wrap up the last 4 steps? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, so out of that, and it's really quick. These are kind of general business things that we ought to do regardless. So out of all of that, you develop your strategy, and you develop this feedback loop, because you want to you want to take that strategy, you want to start testing it, and you want to start testing it in short periods of time, because you don't want to test it. You don't want to get feedback in 2 years, and that's the first feedback you get. You want to be able to mark some timelines. So, timelines I think about are 30, 60, 90, 120, 180 days. Take your strategy, devise a plan, and then develop how you're going to get feedback out of that. Mm-hmm. And then you've also got to define success. Is success 20 new clients a week? Is it 10 new clients a week or 20 new clients a month? Is it a profit margin? Is it, you have to define how you're going to deem this strategy a success. And then
is that really in step 3 about developing a new adaptive strategy?
Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah. Okay. And then you communicate that strategy to your employees, to your stakeholders. So there's communication from you to your employees. Then you begin to communicate that to the market. So that's your marketing piece. And not so much the strategy, but who you are and how you're going to implement the strategy and how you're going to, your identity. So there's the communication piece that is both internal and then external. And then you set out and you implement it. You do it. And then you test it. You get your feedback. Do we need to tweak anything? And then if you do, then you go back and you start making tweaks. And it just becomes a cycle of tweaks. Short term, in some cases short term, in some cases long-term tweaks. Because Rome wasn't built in a day. There are things you're not going to see at 60 days. There are things that you're not going to see at 180 days. But you have to develop that feedback, that loop, and then you live within that loop, and then you start tweaking it. So
really, the feedback loop kind of encapsulates, I shouldn't use that word, the last 4 steps, because step 4 is communicate the strategy, which is communication is this ongoing process of people knowing what's going on. How is the communication rolling out? Right. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? When are we doing it? Timeline, where are we reassessing it? Whatever. So communication strategy. Step 5 is testing that strategy. Is that working? Is that being effective? Step 6, gathering feedback. What are the ways for us to know whether this is working? What are our measurables? Putting those measurables in place. Right. Step 7 is adjusting, but you're saying to kind of have this plan, whether you're looking at 30, 60, 90, and that this loop happens 30, 60, 90, roughly, right, or whatever it is, that really those last 4 steps are all part of the feedback loop. Yep, they really are. Because, again, some things, if you feel like you have to be at 20 customers within 60 days to make this a viable business, right? And you've got to have that feedback. You've got to be able to look down and say, do I have 20 customers in 60 days? Right? So that is a very simplistic aspect of getting feedback. But you've done that because you've defined what success is. You've defined some of those time. I need 20 customers in 60 days. I need 100 customers in 180 days. I need X, Y, and Z because of cost and profit. I mean, all the business numbers, because you can't leave out business at that point. But yeah, so the last pieces of it are really just about feedback. Because if you don't gather the right feedback, then you're not going to know how you need to tweak your strategy. And if you don't know how that's happening and how you need to tweak your organization, your strategy, then, eventually, then in essence, what you're saying is, I don't care what people think, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And, and, if you're Steve Jobs, you might be able to get away with that. So, but most of us aren't Steve Jobs. Well, and I would guess even Steve Jobs is going to have a plan for that, there is a structure or a system of somehow, how do we know? to me, it kind of goes back to that really basic recipe is who is doing what, by when, and how do we know? It's that fourth question that leaders seem to always forget to ask, which is, how do we know? How do
Yeah.
we know that got done? How do we know what happened? How do we know how that went?
Yep. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So that's it.
Good. So I love the feedback loop and how it bundles those fours. So really it feels like the bulk of the work, gathering your group together, is pretty simple and turnkey. Defining your current reality is pretty fun because it's more a snapshot back at where we've been, looking at where we're at, and then what's going on that we need to adapt to, and making sure we really understand the essence of who we are,
Yep.
which then tips us into how are we going to adapt or change or evolve given what's going on, which leads us into step 3, developing a new adapted strategy. And then really step 4 is pretty simple with creating your feedback loop to communicate, test your strategy, have a measurable, gather feedback, and adjust.
Yeah.
Great. Perfect. What, where do you think people should start with this? If they're overwhelmed getting started, where do you start?
I think you start by looking at who you are. I think if you do nothing else, if you figure out how you got to if you can figure out why you're in the situation you're in, if you can define that reality, then that gives you the ability to say, okay, now at least I know who I am, and I know my heart, and I know my passion, and I know my core. And now I can start moving in a direction that's going to help me maybe change what I do, tweak what I do, develop something different. So I think it all starts with that defining reality piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of just deciding what is organic and flexible and what is core to who I am, that if I lost that, it changes really why I'm doing this or my identity. So coming back to that identity.
Yep, exactly.
I love that. That's great. All right, awesome. Well, thanks for sharing this. And just want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And we want to wish you luck as you are working through this. If you have questions, post them. We'd love to banter.
Right, absolutely. And if you need help, we'd love to talk with you, about that as well. So you can contact us through the website, innovativeleaders.co, or just leave a message in the comments.
All right, sounds good. Have a good night.
All right, you too. Take care.